The sun hung low over Dustwater, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood as Colt Hannigan rode into town on a dust-covered bay mare. 10 years had passed since he'd last seen these weathered buildings, these familiar streets that now seemed narrower, meaner than memory allowed. The weight of his father's Colt .45 pressed against his hip, a cold reminder of promises made to a dead man. Main Street stretched before him like a scar across the desert floor. The buildings hadn't changed much. Murphy's General Store still leaned slightly to the left. The Broken Wheel Saloon still pumped piano music and laughter into the evening air. And the courthouse still stood at the town's heart like a monument to false justice. But there was something different in the air, a tension that made his horse's ears twitch nervously. A crowd had gathered in the square before the courthouse. Men in worn denims and dusty hats, women clutching shawls despite the heat, children peering between adult legs with wide, curious eyes. At the center of it all stood a gallows, fresh built from pine that still wept sap in the dying light. Judge Samuel Granger presided over the scene from a raised platform, his black robes making him look like a carrion bird against the pale wood. Age had been kind to him. His hair had gone silver rather than thin. His back remained straight. His voice still carried the authority that could condemn a man with a word. Beside him stood Sheriff McKenna, badge gleaming, hand resting casual-like on his pistol grip. "Let this be a lesson." Granger's voice rolled across the square like thunder. "To any man who thinks himself above the law in Dustwater, horse theft is a hanging offense, and justice will be swift." The condemned man couldn't have been more than 20, Mexican by the look of him, trembling as they positioned the noose. His crime might have been horse theft, but Colt recognized the real offense, being poor and brown in a white man's town. The boy's family wailed from the edge of the crowd, held back by deputies. Colt's jaw tightened. Nothing had changed. The same theater, the same false righteousness, the same powerful men playing God with other folks' lives. His mind flickered back to another hanging, another crowd, another man standing with a noose around his neck. Thomas Hannigan had faced his death with dignity, even knowing he was innocent of the murder they'd pinned on him. "Papa didn't do it," 12-year-old Colt had screamed, fighting against the hands that held him back. "Tell them, Judge, tell them about the gold, tell them about Ryman." But Judge Granger had only gazed down with those cold gray eyes and given the signal, "Now." 10 years later, Colt watched the same eyes survey the crowd with satisfaction. The judge's daughter stood behind him on the platform, a slender figure in dove-gray silk that marked her as quality. Lillian Granger had grown into a beauty, with honey-colored hair pinned up proper and a face that might have graced a cameo. But it was her eyes that caught him, blue as a winter sky and just as cold, staring at something beyond the ugly business before her. The trapdoor dropped. The crowd gasped. The young Mexican's neck snapped with a sound like a branch breaking, and his family's cries rose into the evening air. Colt's horse shied, feeling the tension in her rider's body. Lillian Granger never flinched. She stood still as marble while her father pronounced the execution complete and justice served. But Colt saw her hands, white-gloved and proper, clenched so tight in the folds of her skirt that the knuckles showed through the fabric. The crowd began to disperse, talking in low voices about supper and chores and whether the Murphy boy would finally propose to the schoolteacher. Normal life resuming around death, the way it always did in towns like this. Colt turned his mare down a side street, keeping his hat low. He wasn't ready to be recognized. Not yet. The old boarding house sat on Jackson Street like a broken tooth in a dying mouth. Hannigan's Rest, the faded sign still read, though no one had rested here in years. The windows were boarded, the porch sagged, and tumbleweeds had claimed the front steps. Colt dismounted and tied his horse to what remained of the hitching post. The door protested on rusty hinges as he pushed inside. Dust motes danced in the last rays of sunlight filtering through the cracks. Everything was smaller than he remembered. The front parlor where his mother had served tea to travelers. The narrow stairs his father had climbed each night after closing the ledgers. Ghosts lived in these rooms now. Whispers of a life destroyed by greed and lies. in what had been his father's study. Colt found what he'd come for. The loose floorboard still lifted at his touch, revealing a metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside lay papers, his father's real ledger, not the forged one they'd used at trial. Names, dates, amounts. Evidence of the conspiracy between Judge Granger, Mayor Humphrey, and mine owner Josiah Ryman to steal claims from Mexican settlers and small ranchers. His father had been the town's legal recorder, had refused to falsify deeds, and had paid with his life. Colt studied the names by lamplight, memorizing faces he'd need to find. Some had likely moved on or died, but the three main players remained. He'd seen Granger today. Humphrey still held the mayor's office, grown fat on his ill-gotten gains. And Ryman's Blue Star mine still operated outside town, built on stolen land. A commotion in the street drew him to the window. Through the grime, he saw a Mexican boy, maybe 8 years old, surrounded by 3 deputies. The child clutched a half-eaten apple, tears streaming down his face. "Caught him stealing from Henderson's orchard," one deputy said, cuffing the boy hard enough to send him sprawling. "That's Henderson's problem then," another replied, "not worth our time." "Everything's worth our time when it comes to keeping these people in line." The first deputy drew back his boot. Colt moved without thinking. He was out the door and across the street before the kick could land, catching the deputy's boot and twisting hard. The man went down with a surprised grunt. "Evening, gentlemen." Colt kept his voice mild, hand resting easy on his gun. "Seems like 3 grown men ought to have better things to do than beat on children." "Who the hell are you?" The second deputy had his hand on his pistol. "Just a man who thinks the law ought to protect folks, not terrorize them." Colt helped the boy to his feet, pressing a silver dollar into his small hand. "Run on home, son." The child fled. The deputy studied Colt with narrowed eyes, taking in the well-worn gun belt, the easy stance of a man comfortable with violence. "You're new in town," the first deputy said, rubbing his twisted ankle. "That's the only reason you're walking away from this, but strangers who cause trouble don't last long in Dustwater. I'll keep that in mind." Colt touched his hat brim and walked back to the boarding house, feeling their eyes on his back. Later that evening, he made his way to the Broken Wheel. The saloon hadn't changed. Same scarred bar, same watered whiskey, same poker games running in the corners. He ordered a drink and asked the bartender, casual-like, about Tom Weathers. "Old Tom?" The bartender spat into a brass spittoon. "Still around, if you can call it that. Lives in a shack behind the cemetery. Drinks more than he eats these days." "Why you asking? Heard he used to be somebody, deputy or some such?" "That was a long time ago, before he found the bottle. Or maybe the bottle found him." The bartender moved off to serve other customers. Colt nursed his whiskey, listening to the talk around him. Town gossip hadn't changed much. Who was courting who? Whose cattle had gone missing? Speculation about the new railroad spur. But underneath ran a current of fear. Too many accidents at the mine, too many foreclosures on small farms, too many folks disappearing when they asked questions. Through the saloon's grimy window, he caught a glimpse of gray silk passing by. Lillian Granger walked alone in the gathering darkness. No chaperone in sight, unusual for a lady of her station. She moved with purpose, but her shoulders curved inward like she was protecting herself from more than the evening chill. She paused at the church steps, glancing around before slipping inside. The church would be empty this time of evening, a place for private prayers or private sorrows. Colt wondered which she carried. He left the saloon and walked the streets of his childhood, noting changes and constants. The town had grown some. New businesses catering to the mine workers, a larger jail, a fancy hotel where important folks stayed when they came to do business with Ryman. But underneath the growth lay the same rot, the same men pulling the same strings. At the cemetery, he found his parents' graves, simple markers, nothing fancy. Thomas Hannigan, 1,842 to 1,868 inches, and beside it, Mary Hannigan, 1,844 to 1,867 inches. His mother had died of fever the year before his father's execution, spared the sight of her husband hanging for a crime he didn't commit. Small mercies. Colt laid his hand on his father's stone. I'm back. Pa, took longer than I planned, but I'm here now, and I aim to finish what you started. The sun had set completely now, leaving only stars and a crescent moon to light his way back to the boarding house. As he passed the church, he saw her again, Lillian Granger, standing in the doorway like she couldn't decide whether to stay or go. The moonlight caught her face, and for a moment, the cold mask slipped. He saw exhaustion there, and loneliness, and something else that looked like grief. Then she spotted him. The mask slammed back into place, and she lifted her chin in that way quality folks did when they encountered riffraff. But as she swept past him toward the judge's grand house on the hill, he caught the scent of her perfume, jasmine and gunpowder, an unlikely combination that stayed with him long after she'd gone. Colt stood in the empty street, watching her disappear into the darkness. He'd come to Dustwater for vengeance, to balance the scales for his father's death. It was a simple plan. Identify the guilty, gather proof, deliver justice by law or by lead. But nothing about Lillian Granger seemed simple, and that was going to be a problem. The gunshot cracked through the night like a whip, jerking Lillian from restless sleep. She lay still in her bed, listening to the sounds that followed. Shouts, running feet, the jangle of spurs on the porch below. Through her bedroom door, she heard her father's voice, low and urgent, mixing with others she recognized. Mayor Humphrey's wheeze, Sheriff McKenna's drawl. She slipped from bed and wrapped a shawl around her nightgown. Padding barefoot to the top of the stairs, the grandfather clock in the hall showed 3 a.m. Can't have vigilantes running wild in my town, her father was saying. Find out who he is and what he wants. Already got men asking around, McKenna replied. Stranger came in yesterday, goes by Colt something, keeping to himself mostly. But he stepped into that business with the Mexican boy. The same one who was asking about Tom Weathers at the Broken Wheel? Humphrey's voice pitched higher with worry. That's no coincidence. Samuel, you know what Weathers was involved in. I know exactly what Weathers was involved in. Her father cut him off sharp. Which is why we need to handle this carefully. No heavy-handed foolishness. The last thing we need is attention from the territorial governor. Lillian pressed closer to the banister. Tom Weathers, she remembered him vaguely. A deputy who drunk himself out of a job years ago. But why would a stranger be asking about him? What if he's federal? Humphrey asked. A marshal, maybe, or he's not federal. Her father's tone brooked no argument. Federal men announce themselves. This one's playing a different game. Find out what it is. The men continued talking, but Lillian had heard enough. She retreated to her room and stood at the window, looking out over Dustwater. Somewhere in those dark streets, a stranger was stirring up old secrets. Part of her, the part that had learned to survive in her father's house, whispered that she should stay clear of it, but another part, buried deeper, felt something like hope. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Lillian dressed carefully in a burgundy day dress that her father approved of. Modest, expensive, appropriate for a judge's daughter. She pinned her hair severely, powdered away the shadows under her eyes, and went down to breakfast. Her father sat at the head of the long dining table, reading correspondence while he ate. He didn't look up when she entered. Good morning, Father. Lillian. He set down a letter. I trust you slept well. The lie came easily. Yes, Father. Good. The Barnetts are hosting a social on Saturday. You'll attend. Not a question. Never a question. Of course. Their son James will be there. Recently returned from law school back east. A suitable match. Lillian's hand tightened on her coffee cup. I'm sure he's very accomplished. Her father finally looked at her. Those gray eyes seeing everything and nothing. You're 26. Lillian. Well past time you married and started a family of your own. Your mother. He stopped. as he always did when her mother came up. "James Barnett is a good prospect. You'll make an effort." "Yes, Father." He returned to his papers, dismissing her without words. Lillian ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Another suitable match, another young man who saw her as the judge's daughter. A prize to be won or a connection to be made. She'd been through this dance before. After breakfast, she escaped to town on the pretense of visiting the dressmaker, but instead of going to Mrs. Chen's shop, she found herself at Holbrook's Books, the one place in Dustwater where she could breathe. Old Pete Holbrook looked up from his ledger and smiled. "Miss Lillian, been a while since you've graced my dusty shelves." "Hello, Mr. Holbrook," she returned his smile, the first genuine one she'd managed in days. "Do you have anything new? Got a shipment from San Francisco last week, some poetry that might interest you." He gestured toward the back corner. "Take your time." The bookshop was cramped and dim, smelling of leather and paper and the pipe tobacco Pete forever had clenched between his teeth. Lillian moved between the shelves, fingers trailing over worn spines, seeking solace in other people's words. She was reaching for a volume of Whitman when a voice spoke behind her. "Leaves of Grass, bold choice for a lady." Lillian spun around. The stranger from last night stood there, hat in hand, looking at her with eyes the color of good whiskey. Up close, she could see the sun lines around those eyes, the slight scar on his jaw, the way he held himself like a man ready for trouble. "Mr. Hannigan, Colt Hannigan." He didn't offer more. "Mr. Hannigan." She kept her voice cool, proper. "I wasn't aware that reading poetry required boldness." "Depends on the poetry. Whitman writes about the body and the soul like they're both sacred. Some folks find that troubling. And you," she clutched the book tighter, "do you find it troubling?" "Ma'am, I find very little troubling about honest words honestly spoken." They stood there in the narrow aisle, sizing each other up. Lillian knew she should leave, should cut this improper conversation short, but something in his steady gaze held her. "You're new to Dustwater," she said, "recently arrived, and already making an impression. I heard about the incident with the Mexican boy yesterday." His expression didn't change. "News travels fast." "Everything travels fast in a small town, Mr. Hannigan, especially news about strangers who interfere with the local deputies." "Is that what you call it? Interfering?" A slight edge crept into his voice. "I call it common decency." "Careful." The warning slipped out before she could stop it. "Common decency is in short supply here, and those who insist on it often find themselves unwelcome." He studied her for a long moment. "Speaking from experience, Miss Granger?" She stiffened. He knew who she was. Of course. Everyone knew the judge's daughter. "I should go." "The Whitman," he said, gesturing to the book still in her hands. "You should take it. Man who wrote, 'I am large, I contain multitudes,' understood something about the human heart." Lillian looked down at the book, then back at him. "Do you read poetry, Mr. Hannigan?" "My mother did. Used to read to me and my—" He stopped short. "She loved words. Said they could change the world if you arranged them right. And can they?" Sometimes you need more than words." The bell over the shop door chimed. Sheriff McKenna entered, his bulk filling the doorway. His eyes found them immediately. "Miss Lillian." He touched his hat. "Your father's looking for you." "Thank you, Sheriff. I was just leaving." She moved past Colt without looking at him, paid Pete for the book, and walked out into the blazing sun. But she felt Colt Hannigan's eyes on her all the way down the street that afternoon. Lillian retreated to the cemetery. It was the one place her father's influence didn't quite reach, where the dead kept their own counsel. She made her way to the family plot, to the marble angel that marked her mother's grave, Eleanor Sinclair Granger, beloved wife and mother, 1,843 to 1,869 inches, 26 years since the fever took her. Lillian had been an infant, too young to remember anything but the absence. Her father never spoke of Eleanor except in terms of duty and disappointment. Duty to marry well, disappointment that she'd died before providing him with a son. Lillian sat on the stone bench beside the grave and opened the Whitman, but the words blurred on the page. Her mind kept returning to the bookshop, to Colt Hannigan's careful questions and uncareful eyes. "You've got that look again." She startled. Tom Weathers stood a few feet away, swaying slightly, a flask clutched in one grimy hand. She hadn't heard him approach. "Mr. Weathers." She closed the book. "I didn't realize anyone was here." "Always here." He gestured vaguely at the headstones. "Dead folks make better company than the living. They keep their secrets." He looked terrible. Clothes that hadn't seen soap in weeks, beard gone wild, eyes bloodshot and haunted. This was what remained of the man who'd once worn a badge with pride. "Heard there's a stranger in town asking about me," he continued, taking a pull from his flask. "You met him yet?" Lillian hesitated. "Briefly?" "Hannigan." Weathers said the name like it hurt. Should have known one of them would come back eventually. Sins have a way of circling home like buzzards. "I don't understand," he laughed, ugly and bitter. "Course you don't. You were just a baby when it happened. Your daddy made sure you grew up clean, didn't he? Kept his little girl pure while the rest of us rotted with what we'd done." "Mr. Weathers, you want to know what kind of man your father is?" He lurched closer, whiskey fumes washing over her. "Ask him about Thomas Hannigan. Ask him about the trial. Ask him what happened to the evidence that would have cleared an innocent man." "You're drunk." She stood to leave, but he caught her arm. "Drunk, yeah, but that don't make me a liar." His grip was weak. She could have pulled away easily, but something in his ruined face held her. "That boy's come for justice, miss, and when he gets it, this whole town's gonna burn." He released her and stumbled away among the graves. Lillian stood frozen, her mother's angel gazing down with stone eyes that saw nothing, judged nothing, forgave nothing. That night at dinner, she watched her father carve the roast with precise movements. Each slice perfect, uniform, controlled, just like everything else in his life. "Father," she said carefully, "I was wondering about some of the old cases, from when I was young." He didn't look up. "Why?" "General curiosity. I thought perhaps understanding more about your work." "My work is not your concern." He set down the carving knife. "Your concern is maintaining this household and finding a suitable husband. Nothing more. Of course, I simply thought, the past is past. Lillian, we don't dwell on it." Now he did look at her, and his eyes were winter cold. "Some stones are better left unturned. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Father." But after he retired to his study, she slipped down to the courthouse records room. The night clerk was young, easily charmed by the judge's daughter bringing him coffee and sweet words. He left her alone with the files. No questions asked. It took an hour to find what she was looking for. The file was thin, too thin for a capital case. But there it was, Territory versus Thomas Hannigan, 1868, murder in the first degree. She read by lamplight, piecing together the story. Thomas Hannigan, proprietor of Hannigan's Rest, accused of killing a mine surveyor named Dale Crawford. The evidence was damning. Crawford's body found behind the boarding house. Hannigan's gun the murder weapon. Witnesses who heard him threaten Crawford over a land dispute. But as she read deeper, things felt wrong. The witness testimonies were too neat, too similar, the physical evidence too convenient. And there were gaps. No mention of Hannigan's claimed alibi. No investigation into Crawford's other disputes. At the bottom of the file, she found the execution order, signed by Judge Samuel Granger, witnessed by Sheriff Pete Morrison and Deputy Tom Weathers. A sound in the hallway made her look up. Colt Hannigan stood in the doorway, his face unreadable in the lamplight. Finding interesting reading, Miss Granger? She should have been frightened, alone with this dangerous stranger. Instead, she felt strangely calm. "Your father?" "My father." He moved into the room. cat quiet. Hanged for a murder he didn't commit, but you already suspected that, didn't you? Else you wouldn't be here. How did you— Saw the light. Figured it was either someone working late or someone working secret. Either way, worth investigating. He gestured at the file. What do you think? Guilty or innocent? Lillian looked down at the papers. The evidence seems convenient. That's one word for it. I've got others. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. You know what's not in that file? The real reason they wanted my father dead. He had evidence that Crawford was surveying on behalf of Josiah Ryman, preparing to steal claims from Mexican settlers. My father was the town recorder. He refused to falsify the documents. So they killed him. Killed Crawford and blamed my father. 2 birds, 1 stone. Crawford was getting greedy, threatening to expose the scheme unless he got a bigger cut. Colt's voice stayed level, but she saw his hands clench. They made me watch. 12 years old, held between 2 deputies, while they put a noose around his neck. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate. Your father gave the order. Silence stretched between them. Lillian felt she should defend her father, should storm out in righteous anger. Instead, she asked, what do you intend to do? Find proof. Make them pay. Them? Your father, Mayor Humphrey, Josiah Ryman, the whole rotten crew that built their fortunes on theft and murder. And if you find this proof? He smiled, sharp as a blade. Then justice, one way or another. Lillian closed the file. You should know that Tom Weathers is drunk in the cemetery most days. He might remember things, if approached right. Colt studied her. Why are you helping me? She thought of her mother's grave, of suitable matches and golden cages, of the cold, empty house where she lived like a ghost. Maybe because some stones need turning, whatever my father says. She rose to leave, but he caught her hand. His fingers were calloused, warm, alive in a way nothing in her world was. Be careful, he said. If your father finds out, my father sees what he expects to see, a dutiful daughter who knows her place. She pulled her hand free, already missing the warmth. You're not the only one who can work in secret. Mr. Hannigan. She left him there with the dusty files and the weight of history, and walked home through streets that suddenly seemed full of possibility and danger in equal measure. The lamp flame flickered in the servant's cottage behind the Granger mansion, casting dancing shadows as Lillian worked to clean the gash on Colt's shoulder. Her hands trembled slightly as she peeled back his blood-soaked shirt. You should see Doc Morrison, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Can't. Colt winced as she dabbed whiskey on the wound. He'd have to report a gunshot wound to the sheriff. This is deep. She threaded a needle with practiced efficiency. Hold still. He gripped the table edge as she began to stitch. Outside, thunder rumbled across the desert, promising the season's first storm. How does the judge's daughter know how to stitch wounds? He asked through gritted teeth. My mother taught me before she died. She said a woman should know how to mend what's broken. Lillian kept her eyes on her work, fighting the awareness of his skin under her fingers. She grew up on a ranch before father brought her to town. Tell me about her. Why? She tied off a stitch. Because when you talk about her, you stop looking like you're drowning. The words hit her unexpectedly. She paused, needle in hand. I don't remember much. Fragments mostly. The smell of her lavender soap. Her singing while she worked. Father says I imagine most of it. Your father's wrong about a lot of things. Thunder cracked overhead. Rain began to patter against the windows. She died when I was 3. Lillian continued, needing to fill the silence. Fever took her. Father remarried within 6 months, but that wife left after a year. He never tried again. Said I was all the family duty he could manage. Duty. Colt's jaw tightened. That what he calls it? What else would he call it? She finished the last stitch and reached for bandages. I'm his daughter. His property, really, until he can transfer ownership to a suitable husband. You're nobody's property. She laughed, bitter as winter wind. You don't know this world, Mr. Hannigan. Women like me don't get choices. We get obligations. My mother had choices. She chose to love my father even when it cost her everything. Lillian secured the bandage, her fingers lingering against his chest. What happened to her? Died the year before they hanged Pa. Fever, like yours. But I think it was really heartbreak. She knew what was coming. Couldn't stop it. He caught her hand. She would have liked you. You don't know me. I know you spend your evenings in an empty church. I know you visit your mother's grave to read poetry. I know you're helping a man bent on destroying your father. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I know you're the loneliest person in this town besides me. The rain came harder now, drumming on the roof. Lightning illuminated the small room in stark flashes. Lillian knew she should pull away, return to the main house before she was missed. Instead, she turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. I've been lonely my whole life, she whispered, even in crowded rooms, especially in crowded rooms. Lillian. Her name on his lips was prayer and curse combined. She leaned forward, drawn by something stronger than propriety or sense. His free hand came up to cup her face, calluses rough against her cheek. Their lips met as thunder shook the walls, tentative at first, then deeper as years of hunger crashed together. He tasted of whiskey and gunpowder and dangerous promises. She pressed closer, hands fisting in his hair, feeling alive for the first time in memory. His arm came around her waist, pulling her against him despite his injury, and she gasped at the heat of him, the solid reality after so many years of shadows. When they broke apart, breathing hard, the world had shifted on its axis. This is madness, she said. Yes, my father will kill you if he finds out. He's going to try anyway. She laughed, wild and free. What are we doing? I don't know. He pressed his forehead to hers. All I know is I came here for vengeance and found you instead. And now nothing's simple anymore. She kissed him again, fierce and desperate, tasting salvation and damnation in equal measure. The storm raged outside, but here in this small circle of lamplight, they made their own weather. Later, she lay in his arms on the narrow cot, listening to his heartbeat. The rain had settled to a steady patter. She should go. Dawn wasn't far off, but couldn't make herself move. Tell me about the evidence, she said. What have you found? His hand stroked her hair. Tom Weathers talked, finally. Took a bottle of good whiskey and a promise that his name stays out of it. Your father ordered him to plant the gun at the boarding house. The real killer was one of Ryman's men, brought in special from California. Can Weathers testify? Look at him. Drunk, discredited, terrified. His word against a judge? Colt shook his head. I need documents. Financial records showing the payoffs. The original land surveys. Something solid. Father keeps files in his study. Locked cabinet behind his desk. Too dangerous. If he caught you... He goes to the courthouse early on Thursdays. Has breakfast with the mayor. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. I could get you in. No. You need those files. Not at that cost. He cupped her face. I've already lost everything to your father once. I won't lose you too. You don't have me to lose. Don't I? The question hung between them. Lillian thought of her life stretching ahead. Marriage to James Barnett or someone like him. Children raised in the same cold house. Years of suffocating propriety until she became another ghost haunting Dustwater's streets. I'm already lost, she said. Have been since the day my mother died and left me with him. But maybe we can find each other. He pulled her down for another kiss. Gentle this time, full of promises neither could make. When they finally parted, she dressed quickly, fingers shaking as she pinned her hair. The Barnett social is Saturday, she said. Father will be there late, drinking with the other important men. The house will be empty except for the servants, and they retire early. Lillian. Back door, left side. I'll leave it unlocked. She bent to kiss him once more. Be careful with that shoulder. She slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human suffering and joy alike. In her room, she stood at the window watching the sunrise over Dustwater. Everything looked the same. The weathered buildings, the dusty streets, the gallows standing like a promise in the courthouse square. But she was transformed, marked by Colt's touch and her own choices. 3 days until Saturday. 3 days to maintain her mask while revolution blazed in her chest. That evening at dinner, her father studied her across the table. "You seem different lately." Her heart hammered, but her voice stayed calm. "Do I? More color in your cheeks, almost as if you're coming alive again." His eyes narrowed. "The Barnett social will be good for you. James is eager to further your acquaintance. I'm sure he is. See that you encourage him. It's time you were settled." "Yes, Father." But as she agreed to her own sale, she thought of rough hands gentle on her skin, of whiskey eyes that saw through all her masks, of a narrow cot in a storm where she'd found herself at last. The next days passed in secret preparation. She memorized her father's routines, noted which floorboards creaked, tested the study door's lock with a hairpin. At the dressmaker's, she ordered a new gown for the social, emerald green silk that brought out her eyes, and thought of wearing it for very different reasons than pleasing James Barnett. She found excuses to visit town, hoping for glimpses of Colt. Once she saw him at the general store, hat pulled low, buying ammunition. Their eyes met for an instant before they looked away, the connection between them singing like a struck wire. She left more information where he could find it. Courthouse schedules slipped between pages at the bookshop. Guard rotations sketched on paper tucked behind a loose brick near the boarding house. Each small betrayal of her father felt like breathing after years underwater. Friday night, restless with anticipation, she walked to the cemetery. Her mother's angel stood patient in the moonlight. Lillian sat on the familiar bench and opened her Whitman. "I am not what you supposed, but far different." The words blurred through sudden tears. She wasn't who anyone supposed. Not the dutiful daughter. Not the prize for a suitable man. Not the lonely ghost drifting through empty rooms. She was a woman who'd chosen her own damnation and found it tasted like freedom. "Reading in the dark, Miss Lillian?" she startled. Tom Weathers stood nearby, looking marginally more sober than usual. "Mr. Weathers," came to apologize. He shuffled his feet. "For the other day, speaking out of turn about your father." "You spoke the truth," he laughed, short and sharp. "Truth's a dangerous thing in Dustwater. Your young man learning that?" "He's not my—" "Save it. Whole town's talking about the judge's daughter making eyes at the stranger." He leaned against a headstone. "You know what he's planning. Justice. That what he calls it?" Weathers pulled out his flask, considered it, then put it away untouched. "Maybe so. Lord knows this town could use some. But justice has a way of catching innocent folks in its teeth. Like Thomas Hannigan?" "Yeah." His voice went soft. "Like Thomas. Good man. Honest. Stood up to power and paid the price." He looked at her directly. "You prepared to pay that price?" "What price hasn't already been paid? I've been buried alive in that house for 26 years. There's worse things than being buried alive. Miss, trust a man who knows." He shambled away, leaving her alone with the dead and her choices. Tomorrow night would change everything. Win or lose, live or die. She would finally be free. Saturday dawned bright and merciless. Lillian spent the morning being laced into the green silk while her father reviewed her duties. Smile at James. Dance twice, but not 3 times. Encourage, but don't seem eager. Represent the family properly. "You look beautiful," he said, surveying the final result. "Your mother would be proud." The lie burned her throat. Her mother would weep to see what her daughter had become and what she was about to do. The Barnett Ranch sprawled 5 miles outside town. All imported lumber and Eastern pretensions. Lanterns lined the drive, and fiddle music spilled from the open doors. Lillian fixed her smile and let her father lead her into battle. James Barnett claimed her immediately. Tall, bland, with soft hands and softer conversation. He spoke of his law practice, his prospects, his admiration for her father. She made appropriate responses while her mind counted minutes. "You seem distracted," James said during their second dance. "Do I? I apologize." "No need. I understand these gatherings can be overwhelming for the gentler sex." She bit her tongue and smiled wider. Somewhere in town. Colt was preparing to enter her father's study. Every moment she had to pretend stretched like eternity. Finally, her father joined the other men in Barnett's study for cigars and brandy. She excused herself, claiming a headache, and asked for the carriage to take her home. The house stood dark and quiet. As promised, the servants had retired after preparing for the judge's late return. Lillian went to her room and changed quickly. Dark dress, soft shoes, hair pinned severely back. Then she waited. She heard him before she saw him. A slight scrape at the back door. Her heart hammered as she crept downstairs. He stood in the kitchen, all in black, a shadow among shadows. "You came," she whispered. "Couldn't stay away." He caught her hand. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." She led him through the dark house, past portraits of stern ancestors and imported furniture that had never known love. Here, the study door stood closed, forbidding. She produced the hairpin and worked the lock, hands steady despite the fear singing through her veins. The tumblers clicked. Inside, her father's presence hung heavy, cigar smoke, leather, the weight of authority. Colt moved to the cabinet behind the desk while she kept watch. "Locked," he said. She pulled out a key, copied from his spare. He looked at her with something like awe. "You've thought of everything. I've had years to think." The cabinet opened to reveal neat rows of files. Colt rifled through them quickly, selecting several. Land deeds, financial transfers, letters from Ryman. He smiled, sharp and triumphant. "Got you, you bastards." A floorboard creaked in the hallway. They froze. Footsteps approached, heavy, uneven. The door opened. Mayor Humphrey stood there, swaying slightly, clearly drunk. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. Well, the judge's daughter and the dead man's son. He laughed, ugly and knowing. "Samuel's going to have your head for this, boy. Hers too, family or not." Colt moved faster than thought. He had Humphrey against the wall, arm across his throat, before the man could cry out. "You're drunk," Colt said quietly. "Wandered into the wrong house, didn't see anything. Like hell." Humphrey's eyes bulged. "You think you can threaten me? I own half this town, built on stolen land, with blood money." Colt pressed harder. "I've got the proof right here. Want to discuss it with the territorial governor?" Humphrey's face went purple. Lillian watched, fascinated and horrified, as power shifted in a handful of seconds. "Please," Humphrey wheezed. "I had no choice. Ryman and Granger, they forced nothing. You chose greed over justice." Colt released him. Humphrey slumped against the wall, gasping. "But you can choose again. Leave town. Tonight. Don't come back. I can't just—" "Yes, you can." Colt's hand rested on his gun. "Or we can settle this another way." Humphrey looked between them, calculating. Then his shoulders slumped. "I always knew it would end badly. Just not like this." He straightened his coat. "I'll be gone by dawn." He stumbled out. They stood in the wreckage of the moment, breathing hard. "He'll run straight to father," Lillian said. "No, he's a coward. Cowards always save themselves first." Colt gathered the files. "But we need to go. Now." They slipped back through the kitchen, into the night. But as they reached the back gate, hoofbeats thundered up the drive. Torches blazed. Her father's voice rang out, commanding his men to search the grounds. "Humphrey didn't go to him," Colt said. "Someone else saw. Doesn't matter." Lillian pulled him toward the stable. "We have to run." But it was too late. Deputies surrounded them, guns drawn. Sheriff McKenna stepped forward, almost apologetic. Miss Lillian, Mr. Hannigan, Judge wants to see you both. Her father stood on the front porch, still in his evening clothes, face carved from stone. His eyes found hers, no surprise there, only cold fury, and something that might have been disappointment. Bring them inside, he said. We have matters to discuss. The judge's study felt smaller, with armed men crowding the doorway. Samuel Granger stood behind his desk, the very picture of controlled rage. The files Colt had taken lay spread before him like accusations. Leave us, he commanded the deputies. Wait outside. If Mr. Hannigan attempts anything foolish, shoot him. Sheriff McKenna hesitated. Judge, the lady. My daughter's in no danger from me. His voice could have frozen hell. Go. They filed out, leaving the three of them in suffocating silence. Granger's eyes moved from Colt to Lillian, lingering on his daughter with something harder than disappointment. 26 years, he said finally. 26 years I've protected you, provided for you, shaped you into a lady worthy of respect, and this is how you repay me, sneaking through the dark with this nobody? He's not nobody, Lillian said. He's Thomas Hannigan's son. I know exactly who he is. Granger's mask cracked slightly. Did you think I wouldn't remember? That boy screaming in the crowd while his father danced on air? You murdered him, Colt said quietly. I executed a criminal convicted by a jury of his peers, a jury you bought, with evidence you fabricated. Colt gestured at the files. It's all here, Judge, every payoff, every forged document, every life you destroyed for Ryman's gold. Granger's laugh was winter wind. You think those papers mean anything? I own every lawman between here and Santa Fe. Who exactly do you plan to show them to? The territorial governor, federal marshals, newspapers back east. Colt stepped forward. The world's getting smaller. Judge, your kind of justice doesn't fly anymore. My kind of justice built this town from nothing, brought civilization to savagery. Granger's voice rose. Yes, hard choices were made. Yes, men died. That's the price of progress. Thomas Hannigan's death wasn't progress, Lillian said. It was murder. Her father's hand slammed on the desk. He was weak, clinging to outdated principles while opportunity slipped away. Men like him hold society back. Men like him hold society together, she shot back. With honor and decency and truth. Truth. Granger rounded the desk, advancing on her. You want truth, daughter? Your precious mother wasn't the saint you imagine. She came from nothing, trapped me with her condition, then had the audacity to die and leave me with you. The slap cracked across his face before Lillian realized she'd moved. Granger touched his cheek, eyes wide with shock. You didn't deserve her, she said. You don't deserve anything but the gallows you've sent so many to. For a moment, father and daughter stood frozen. Then Granger smiled, cold and terrible. Deputy Morrison, he called. The door opened. A young deputy peered in nervously. Escort Mr. Hannigan to the jail. He's under arrest for theft and trespassing. No, Lillian moved between them. You can't. I can do whatever I please in my town. Granger's voice was ice. As for you, daughter, you'll retire to your room until I decide what to do with you. I won't let you. You'll do exactly as you're told, or I'll have you committed to the Territorial Asylum for hysteria. Don't test me, Lillian. You know I'll do it. Colt caught her arm as she lunged forward. Don't, he said softly. Not like this. Listen to him, Granger advised. He's trying to spare you worse consequences. The deputies took Colt's guns, bound his hands. As they led him past, he held Lillian's eyes. Remember what your mother taught you, he said. Then he was gone, and she was alone with the man who'd called himself her father. Sit, Granger commanded. She remained standing. What are you going to do to him? What the law demands, he'll hang for his crimes, just like his father. His only crime is seeking justice. Justice? Granger poured himself whiskey, hands perfectly steady. Let me tell you about justice. Daughter, Your mother's family sold her to me to pay their debts, 15 years old, pregnant with another man's child, and they packaged her up like goods for market. Lillian's legs gave out. She sank into a chair. You're lying. I needed a wife for appearances. She needed respectability, a business arrangement. He sipped his drink. The baby died, of course, weak like its father. But by then we were married, and appearances had to be maintained. Then I'm not... She couldn't finish. You're mine by law, if not by blood. His eyes were pitiless. I kept you, raised you, gave you everything. And this is how you repay that kindness. With betrayal. You don't know what kindness is. Her voice came from very far away. Or love, or anything that makes us human. Humanity is weakness. I tried to teach you strength. He set down his glass. Go to your room. Think about what you've done. In the morning, you'll write Mr. Barnett and accept his proposal. A quick marriage will quell any gossip about tonight. I'll die first. No, you won't. He smiled thinly. You'll do as you're told, like you always have. Because despite this momentary madness, you're still my daughter, trained from birth to obey. She stood on unsteady legs. At the door, she turned back. Mother knew love once, real love. That's more than you'll ever have. Love? He laughed. Love is what killed her, pining for a dead farmer while married to a judge. She chose grief over reality and wasted away. Don't make her mistake. Lillian. She fled to her room, locking the door behind her. Everything she'd believed shattered around her like glass. Not the judge's daughter by blood. Her mother sold like cattle. Love that killed. Outside her window, the jail squatted in the darkness. Colt was there, facing death for trying to right old wrongs. She pressed her hand to the glass and made a decision. Moving quickly, she changed into her darkest clothes. From her jewelry box, she took the pearl-handled derringer her mother had hidden there years ago, loaded, ready, waiting for the right moment. The house had gone quiet. She slipped into the hallway, avoiding the squeaky boards. Her father's study was empty, but she heard voices from the parlor. Peeking in, she saw him conferring with Sheriff McKenna and Josiah Ryman. Hang him at dawn. Ryman was saying, no trial. No questions. That's not legal. McKenna protested weakly. Legal is what I say it is. Granger replied. The boy's a threat to order. Swift justice prevents further unrest. What about the girl? Ryman asked. Leave my daughter to me. She'll fall in line once her paramour is dead. Lillian bit her knuckle to stifle a sound. Dawn, only hours away. She crept to the kitchen, then out the back door. The night was cool, stars brilliant overhead. She kept to shadows, making her way to the jail. A single deputy dozed on the front steps. She recognized him, Art Collins, young and new to the job. She picked up a rock and threw it down the alley. He startled awake and went to investigate. Inside, another deputy sat at the desk, playing solitaire. Before he could look up, Lillian pressed the derringer to his neck. Don't move. Don't speak. Miss Granger? He sounded more confused than frightened. What are you... The keys. Now. He fumbled for them. Your father will... My father is a murderer and a thief. The keys. He handed them over. She backed toward the cells, keeping the gun trained on him. Colt stood at the bars, eyes dark with concern. Lillian, what are you doing? What my mother taught me. She unlocked his cell, mending what's broken. He stepped out, took the gun from her shaking hands. The deputy raised his hands, face pale. Please, I got family. Colt reversed the pistol and knocked him out with the butt. The man crumpled. They dragged him into the cell and locked it. They're planning to hang you at dawn, Lillian said. No trial. I figured as much. He retrieved his guns from the desk drawer. You shouldn't have come. Now you're implicated. I've been implicated since the day I was born. She caught his face between her hands. He told me things. About my mother. About myself. I'm not even his true daughter. You're not his anything. Colt kissed her hard. We need horses, supplies. Can you get to the stable? Yes, but… Shouts erupted outside. Art Collins had discovered his unconscious partner. In moments, the whole town would be awake. Too late for subtle. Colt checked his weapons. Back door! Move! They burst out of the jail as Collins rounded the corner. Colt's shot sent him diving for cover. Lights flared in windows. Dogs barked. The hunt was on. They ran through twisting alleys, dodging pursuit. Behind them! Sheriff McKenna's voice boomed orders. A bullet whined past Lillian's ear. The livery! Colt panted. If we can get horses… But men emerged from the stable, rifles ready. They veered left, plunging into the maze of workers' shacks on the poor side of town. Here, no lights showed. These people knew better than to involve themselves in the law's business. An old Mexican woman beckoned from a doorway. They ducked inside. She said nothing, just pointed to a trap door. Below lay a root cellar, barely big enough for two. They huddled in the darkness, listening to boots thunder overhead. Lillian pressed against Colt, feeling his heart race match hers. Time crawled like molasses. Finally, silence. The old woman opened the trap door, said something in Spanish. Colt replied, pressed silver into her weathered hands. She says they've moved on. He translated, but they'll be back. They climbed out. Dawn was breaking, painting the eastern sky crimson. In the plaza, men were already gathering around the gallows. We can't stay here, Colt said. They'll tear the town apart looking for us. There's an old line shack, Lillian said. North, where the canyon opens up, abandoned for years. How far? 8 miles, maybe 10. On foot, in daylight. With the whole town hunting us? He shook his head. We'll never make it. Then we make our stand here. Lillian, no. She gripped his hands. I won't run anymore. Won't hide. Won't pretend. If they want us, they'll have to take us in front of everyone. He studied her face. Saw the steel there. Together. Together. They walked out of the shacks, into the growing light. People scattered before them. Someone ran for the sheriff. In the plaza, the crowd parted. Judge Granger stood by the gallows, Ryman beside him. Her father's face showed no emotion as they approached. Dramatic as always. Lillian, he said, but pointless. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Maybe, she said, but I'm not out of courage. That's something you never understood. Father, courage isn't about power. It's about standing up when standing up costs everything. Pretty words. Ryman spat tobacco juice. Won't stop bullets. No, Colt agreed. But they might make folks think about justice, about who really runs this town and how, about what kind of men they want making their laws. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of these people remembered Thomas Hannigan, remembered questions never answered. Enough, Granger commanded. Sheriff, arrest them both. McKenna stepped forward reluctantly. Judge, maybe we should… Now, Sheriff. But before McKenna could move, hoofbeats echoed off the buildings. A dozen riders swept into the plaza, dust swirling. At their head rode a man in a black suit, a badge gleaming on his chest, a U.S. Marshal's badge. Marshal Wade Tucker, he announced. I'm looking for Judge Samuel Granger. Granger's composure finally cracked. On what business? The business of justice. Judge. Tucker dismounted, hand near his gun. Seems the territorial governor's been getting some interesting mail. Documents, evidence, questions about trials going back years. He pulled out a folded paper. Samuel Granger, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and corruption of justice. You'll answer to a federal court. This is preposterous. Granger backed toward the courthouse. I am the law here? Not anymore, Tucker said mildly. Boys? The federal deputies moved in. Ryman went for his gun and was down before he cleared leather. Granger broke and ran. Surprising for a man his age. He made it 3 steps before Lillian's derringer spoke. The shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell at the foot of his own gallows. blood spreading across his white shirt. Lillian stood with the little gun smoking in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "That's for my mother," she said, "and for Thomas Hannigan, and for every soul you crushed beneath your pride." Granger looked up at her, shock giving way to something almost like understanding. "You're stronger than I thought," he gasped. Maybe there's hope for the bloodline after all." "I'm not your bloodline," she said. "I'm my mother's daughter, and she loved a good man who died for truth. That's my heritage, not you, never you." The judge's eyes went dark. The man who'd ruled Dustwater through fear and force died in the dust at his daughter's feet. Marshal Tucker surveyed the scene. "Well, this complicates things some." "She saved you the cost of a trial," Colt said, moving to Lillian's side. "Man was guilty as sin and everybody here knows it." "Maybe so." Tucker looked around at the crowd, scared, excited, confused. "Folks, federal authorities taking over until we can sort this mess out. Anyone with grievances against the former administration, bring them to the courthouse. We'll see about setting things right." He turned to Lillian. "Ma'am, I'll need that gun." She handed it over without protest, swaying on her feet. Colt caught her as her knees buckled. "It's over," she whispered against his chest. "No," he said, holding her close while the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows of the past. "It's just beginning." Marshal Tucker established temporary headquarters in the courthouse, and within hours, a line of citizens stretched down the street. Years of suppressed grievances poured forth like water through a broken dam. The federal deputies took statements, documented claims, began the slow work of untangling decades of corruption. Dustwater held its breath, caught between old fear and new hope. Lillian sat in what had been her father's study, staring at the bloodstain on the carpet where they'd brought him to die. The house felt different now, larger and smaller at once, full of ghosts but emptied of menace. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, had tried to clean the stain, but Lillian stopped her. "Leave it," she said. "Let it remind me what justice costs." Colt found her there as evening fell, sitting in the dark. "You should eat something," he said. "I killed my father." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "You killed a tyrant who happened to raise you." "Is there a difference?" He knelt before her chair, taking her cold hands. "Your father died years ago, if he ever existed at all. What you killed was the man who murdered him. I keep thinking I should feel something, grief, guilt, horror." She met his eyes. "But there's nothing, just empty." "That's shock. It'll pass. And then we deal with whatever comes next." A knock interrupted them. Marshal Tucker stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Granger, Mr. Hannigan, sorry to intrude." "It's your investigation, Marshal," Lillian said. "Intrude away." Tucker entered, chose a chair carefully. "I've been going through your father's files. Man kept meticulous records, names, dates, amounts, enough to hang half the powerful men in the territory if they weren't already dead or fled." "Good," Colt said. "Maybe not." Tucker pulled out a cigar. Thought better of it. "See, the thing about cleaning up corruption is you gotta have something to replace it with. Right now, this town's got no judge, no mayor, half a sheriff's department. That's a recipe for chaos." "What are you suggesting?" Lillian asked. "I'm suggesting that federal oversight can only last so long. Sooner or later, Dustwater needs to stand on its own feet, needs leaders who understand both what was wrong and how to make it right." "If you're thinking," Colt started. "I'm thinking out loud, is all." Tucker stood. "Miss Granger, there's another matter. Your father's will. Burn it." "Can't do that. Legal document, properly witnessed. You inherit everything. The house, the accounts, considerable holdings throughout the territory." Lillian laughed, sharp and bitter. "Blood money. Money that could do good in the right hands. Build schools, support the mission, make restitution to folks who were wronged." Tucker moved to the door. "Think about it. Oh, and Mr. Hannigan might want to see Tom Weathers. He's asking for you." They found Weathers in a boarding house room, sober for possibly the first time in years. He looked smaller without the alcohol, older, more fragile. "Heard about the judge," he said. "Can't say I'm sorry." "Neither can we." Colt replied, "I suppose you want the rest of it now, the truth about that night. If you're willing." Weathers stared out the window. "Your father was a good man, honest. That's what killed him. In the end, see, Ryman needed those land grants to expand his mine. Mexican families had been there for generations, but their papers were all in Spanish. Easy to challenge. Your father refused to help falsify the claims." He paused, gathering strength or courage. "So they decided to remove him, but quiet-like. Crawford was already becoming a problem, greedy, unreliable. Ryman's man. Harlan Wade. Shot Crawford behind the boarding house. Then we planted your father's gun. Coached witnesses, built an airtight case." "Why?" Lillian asked. "Why go along with it? They had things on me. Gambling debts, a girl in Santa Fe. Granger said cooperate or hang alongside Hannigan." Weathers's hands shook. "I was young and scared and stupid. Been paying for it ever since." "You could have come forward," Colt said. "Any time in 10 years. With what proof? Against what power?" Weathers turned from the window. "I'm not making excuses. Just explaining. Every drop of whiskey I've drunk has been trying to wash the taste of that lie out of my mouth." "Will you testify now?" Lillian asked. "For the federal investigation?" "Already have. Told Tucker everything." He managed a weak smile. "Figure I'll be dead or in prison soon enough. Might as well go with a clean conscience." They left him to his regrets. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of redemption and damnation. Colt took Lillian's hand, and they walked without destination, just moving through streets that seemed foreign without the weight of fear. "What Tucker said," Colt began, "about the town needing leadership. I can't stay here." The words burst out of her. "Every corner, every building, every face reminds me of him, of what I was, what I did. Then we leave, simple as that. And go where? Anywhere. California, Oregon. Hell, Mexico if you want. Whole world out there waiting." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "What about your justice? Your father's vindication?" "Got that. Granger's dead. Ryman's dead. The truth's out there for anyone who wants to hear it." He cupped her face. "Pa's ghost can rest now. Time for the living to get on with living. Together, if you'll have me, worn-out gunmen with more past than future. I killed my own father. Colt, what kind of woman does that make me? The kind who chooses right over blood, justice over comfort, truth over lies." He kissed her forehead. "The kind I want to spend my life with." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Around them, dust water went about its evening business, quieter than before, uncertain, but with a feeling of possibility that hadn't existed in years. "There's something I need to do first," she said. The church was empty, as she'd known it would be. Lillian lit candles at the altar, then sat in the front pew. She didn't pray, didn't know how anymore, but sat in silence, letting the peace of the place wash over her. Father Miguel found her there an hour later. "I heard about your father," he said, settling beside her. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Are you?" "I'm sorry for the necessity of it, for the choices that led there, for the pain you carry. He was a monster, father. He was a man who chose to become monstrous. There's a difference." "Is there? Sometimes I think the monster was always there, waiting." Father Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Do you know the story of your mother's first marriage?" Lillian turned sharply. "You knew?" "I performed the ceremony. Young Elena Morales and James McKay, a farmer from Kansas. They loved each other truly. When he died of fever, she nearly followed from grief. And my father offered salvation of a sort, respectability, security, a new name to hide the old pain." The priest sighed. "I advised against it, but she was desperate, and her family needed the money he offered. So you're Elena's daughter. That's all that matters. She loved you from the moment she knew you existed. Loved you enough to endure a loveless marriage, a cold house, years of quiet suffering. Why didn't she leave? Where would she go? A Mexican woman with a half-blood daughter in a world that barely acknowledged either as human. Father Miguel touched the crucifix at his chest. She stayed to give you a chance at something better. And look how that turned out. Yes, look, you're free now. Wealthy, able to make your own choices. He stood. Your mother's sacrifice wasn't wasted. Child, unless you waste it yourself. He left her with the candles and her thoughts. When she finally emerged, Colt was waiting on the steps. Feel better? I feel clearer. She took his offered arm. Like I can finally see past the walls he built around me. They walked back toward the judge's house. Her house now, though the thought still felt foreign. As they turned onto Main Street, they saw a commotion at the jail. A crowd gathered, voices raised in anger. Sheriff McKenna stood on the steps, trying to maintain order. His badge was gone. His authority evaporated with Granger's death. The crowd pressed closer, shouting about prisoners, about justice delayed. They want to lynch the Mexican horse thief, someone told Colt. Say if Granger could ignore the law, so can they. Christ! Colt started forward, but Lillian caught his arm. No, this is mine to handle. Before he could protest, she was pushing through the crowd, climbing the jail steps. Her appearance shocked them to temporary silence. The judge's daughter, killer of her own father, standing where he once pronounced sentence. You want justice. Her voice carried clear and strong. Then act justly. You want to be better than my father? Then be better. The law isn't dead just because he is. Law never protected us. Someone shouted. Only them with money and power. Then change the law. Marshal Tucker's taking statements, investigating crimes. Work with him. Build something new. She looked over the crowd, meeting eyes. Or become the very thing you hated. Your choice. An old Mexican man stepped forward. Why should we listen to you? You lived soft while we suffered. You're right, I did. And I'll carry that shame forever. She straightened. But I also put a bullet in the man who caused that suffering. That should count for something. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Slowly, they began to disperse. The immediate crisis passed, but Lillian knew it was only the beginning. Dustwater was a town without foundation, teetering between order and chaos. That was well done, Marshal Tucker said, appearing at her elbow. You've got your mother's way with people. You knew her? Briefly, before she married the judge. Beautiful woman, kind. Deserved better than she got. He studied Lillian. You favor her more than him. Thank God for that. Miss Granger, I need to speak plainly. This town is going to tear itself apart without leadership. The federal government can impose order, but not for long. Local folks need to step up. I told you, I'm not asking you to stay forever, but give it 6 months. Help establish a new government, new laws. Use your father's money to start making things right. Tucker's eyes were steady. You killed the old Dustwater. Don't you owe it to help birth the new? Lillian looked at Colt, saw understanding in his eyes. They'd planned to run, to find clean air somewhere far from the shadow of the gallows. But running was what the old Lillian would have done. The ghost girl who'd hidden in churches and graveyards. 6 months? She said. Then we're gone. Tucker smiled. That's all I ask. That night, in the small cottage behind the main house, she couldn't bear to sleep under that roof yet. Lillian lay in Colt's arms and talked about the future. We'll need a new sheriff, she said, and judges who actually know law, not just power. Tom Weathers might do for sheriff if he stays sober. He's too broken, but maybe as a deputy, with the right man over him. She traced patterns on Colt's chest. What about you? What about me? You could wear a badge. You've got the skills, and God knows you've got the moral authority. He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, my whole life's been about the past, about avenging Pa. I don't know who I am without that purpose. So find out, We've got 6 months. We? You think I'm doing this alone? Building a new town on the ashes of my father's empire? She rose up on an elbow to look at him. I need you, Colt, not just for protection or advice. I need someone who reminds me why we're doing this. He pulled her down for a kiss that started gentle and grew hungry. They made love slowly, mapping each other's scars and promises, building their own foundation in the dark. Later, as dawn crept through the windows, Lillian watched him sleep. The lines of tension that had marked his face were softer now, the driven need for vengeance replaced by something that might become peace. She thought of her mother, loving and losing, accepting a devil's bargain to protect her unborn child. Thought of Thomas Hannigan, standing for truth though it cost him everything. Thought of all the unnamed dead who'd built Dustwater with their blood and sorrow. I'll try, she whispered to their ghosts. 6 months to plant something better in this bitter soil. Then Colt and I will find our own promised land. But even as she made the promise, part of her wondered if 6 months would be enough, or if, like her mother, she'd find herself trapped by duty and necessity, trading freedom for the hope of redemption. Only time would tell. And in Dustwater, time had a way of running red with blood and gold with promise. Never quite clean, never quite damned, always balanced on the edge of becoming. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Colt faced Jake Morrison in the dusty main street. Morrison had ridden in that morning with 2 other hired guns, looking for the man who'd killed Josiah Ryman. Word traveled fast in the territory. There was blood money on Colt's head, posted by Ryman's associates back east. $50,000, Morrison called out, hand hovering near his pistol. That's what your life's worth, Hannigan. More money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. Colt stood easy, relaxed, the way his father had taught him before everything went to hell. Around them, townspeople scattered into doorways and behind water troughs. This was the 3rd bounty hunter this week, and folks knew the pattern by now. That money's got blood on it, Colt said. Ryman's blood, and all the innocent folk he destroyed. You sure you want to carry that weight? I carry nothing but gold. Friend. Morrison's hand twitched. Now, you coming peaceful, or do we dance? Jake Morrison. Lillian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She emerged from the courthouse, wearing the severe black dress she'd adopted since her father's death. Born in Tucson, 1851, wanted in 3 territories for murder, robbery, and assault. That about right. Morrison's eyes flicked to her, confused. This ain't your business, woman. Everything in this town is my business. She held up a paper. This is a federal warrant for your arrest. Marshal Tucker signed it this morning after I wired the authorities in Tucson. You can surrender to Mr. Hannigan here, who's now a duly sworn deputy. Or you can try your luck. Your choice. Deputy? Morrison laughed ugly. You made this killer a lawman? Better a reformed killer than an active one. Lillian's voice could have frozen the desert. Choose quickly. The marshal's men are already moving into position. Morrison's partners looked around nervously, spotted the federal deputies emerging from strategic positions. The arithmetic of violence had shifted. This ain't over, Morrison snarled, but his hands moved away from his weapons. Colt stepped forward, pulled the guns from Morrison's holsters with practiced efficiency. Yes, it is. You're under arrest for attempted murder of a peace officer. Boys, you want to join your friend? Or ride out while you can? The 2 partners exchanged glances, then wheeled their horses and spurred hard out of town. Morrison spat in the dust, but submitted to the iron cuffs Colt produced. You did good, Colt told Lillian as they walked Morrison to jail. I did what was necessary. But her hands shook slightly as she folded the warrant. How many more will come? Until the word spreads that Dustwater's no longer easy pickings. Then they'll find other towns, other victims. He locked Morrison in a cell. It's the way of things. That evening, Lillian stood before the assembled town council, a mix of merchants, ranchers, and working folks elected just the week before. It was the first formal government meeting in Dustwater's history not dominated by her father's hand-picked men. We need to talk about the mine, she said. The room tensed. Ryman's Blue Star mine employed half the town, but everyone knew it was built on stolen land and broken promises. "Without the mine, we got nothing," said Carl Henderson, who ran the general store. "No jobs, no commerce. Town'll dry up and blow away." "The mine's not closing," Lillian clarified. "But ownership needs to revert to its rightful holders, the families whose land was stolen." "That's near 50 families." Someone protested. "How's that gonna work?" "Cooperative ownership, equal shares among the original claim holders. I've had lawyers drawing up the papers." She set a thick document on the table. "The territorial governments already approved it, contingent on local support. And if Ryman's partners object," this from Sarah Walsh, the new school teacher. "He had investors back east, powerful men. They'll be paid fair market value for their shares, using funds from my father's estate." Lillian's voice carried no emotion. "Blood money buying back bloodland. There's justice in that." The debate raged for hours. Some feared economic collapse, others violence from displaced interests. But gradually, led by the Mexican and small farming families who'd suffered most under the old regime, support built for the plan. "All in favor," Mayor Garrett called. He was new to the position, a baker who'd never sought power but accepted it when neighbors insisted. Hands rose, not all, but enough. "Motion passes. God help us all." Outside, Colt waited in the shadows. "Productive meeting? We'll see. Either I've just saved this town or doomed it." She took his offered arm. "Walk with me?" They strolled through streets grown familiar over the past weeks. The town was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing. New businesses opened where corrupt ones had closed. Children played where chain gangs once labored. It wasn't paradise, but it wasn't hell anymore either. "Tom Weathers came by today," Colt said. 30 days sober. Wants to know if the deputy position's still open." "What did you tell him?" "To ask again at 60 days. Man's gotta prove he wants it more than whiskey." They paused at the cemetery gate. Lillian no longer spent hours among the graves, but she still visited her mother weekly, leaving fresh flowers and unspoken apologies. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes after." "After?" "The 6 months. Where we go, what we do." She turned to face him. "I've lived my whole life in cages. First my father's, now one I'm building myself out of guilt and duty. What if I can't exist outside them? Then we'll figure it out together." He cupped her face. "You're stronger than you know. Lillian, I've watched you reshape this entire town through sheer will. That's different. That's penance. For all the years I did nothing while people suffered. Penance has to end sometime, else it becomes its own kind of tyranny." She kissed him then, there in the gateway between the living and the dead, tasting promise and fear in equal measure. When they parted, she felt something ease in her chest. "California," she said. "I want to see the ocean." "Want to stand where the land ends and know there's nowhere left to run. California it is, but the territory had other plans." The attack came 3 nights later. Lillian woke to smoke and shouting, the acrid smell of burning wood. She grabbed her robe and the pistol Colt insisted she keep bedside, racing to the window. The courthouse was ablaze, flames licking at the night sky. Figures ran through the streets, too many to be townspeople, too organized to be random violence. Raiders? She dressed quickly, hands steady despite the chaos. Outside, gunfire erupted from multiple directions. This wasn't a raid, it was an invasion. Colt burst through her door, Winchester in hand. Ryman's partners. They've hired an army. How many? 30, maybe 40 men, professional killers. He checked his weapons. They're not here to negotiate. The mine records, already burning, but that won't stop the legal transfer. Too many copies in too many places. He pulled her toward the door. They're here for revenge. For you. They slipped out the back as riders surrounded the main house. The cottage they'd shared erupted in flames behind them. Everything they'd built, everything they'd hoped for, turning to ash. The jail, Colt said. Stone walls, Good sight lines. We can make a stand. No. Lillian's voice was iron. The church. Father Miguel will have gathered the families there. That's where we defend. They fought their way through streets turned battlefield. Colt's Winchester spoke death to shadows, while Lillian's pistol proved she'd inherited more than her mother's kindness. By the time they reached the church, both were bloodied but standing. Inside, terrified families huddled among the pews. Father Miguel moved among them, offering comfort where bullets would serve better. Marshal Tucker and 3 deputies held the windows, but they were vastly outnumbered. Thank God, Tucker said. We need every gun. How bad? Colt asked. Lost 2 deputies already. Sheriff's office is gone. They've got us surrounded. Tucker's face was grim. I've sent riders for federal reinforcements, but they won't arrive in time. Lillian checked her ammunition. We hold or we die. Inspiring, Tucker said dryly. You've got your father's way with words. My father would have negotiated, sold out these people for his own skin. She took position at a window. I'm not my father. The attack came in waves. Professional killers testing defenses, probing for weakness. The church's thick adobe walls absorbed bullets, but windows shattered, and screams punctuated the gunfire as defenders fell. During a lull, a voice called from outside. Miss Granger, let's discuss terms. She recognized him, Charles Ashford, Ryman's Eastern partner. She'd met him once at her father's table, all smooth manners and hidden steel. No terms, she called back. You're in violation of federal law. Surrender now and face trial. His laugh was cultured, amused. You killed my partner, destroyed my investments, and you speak of law? Come now, be reasonable. Walk out, just you. And this ends. These people go free. Don't listen. Colt growled. He'll kill you slow just to make a point. I know. She reloaded carefully. But he might keep his word about the others. Lillian, no. I won't hide behind innocence. She started to rise, but Colt pulled her down hard. You want to die for pride? Fine, but not while I'm breathing. He kissed her fierce. We survive together or we don't survive at all. The attack resumed with renewed fury. Dawn was hours away, ammunition running low, defenders falling one by one. In the brief pauses, children cried while their parents tried to shield them with their own bodies. Then, unexpected, a new sound. Hoofbeats, hundreds of them, and war cries that hadn't been heard in these parts for years. Apache warriors flooded the streets, led by Joseph Crow Feather, whose family had been among those cheated by Ryman. Thought you might need help, Joseph said, sliding through a window with practiced ease. My people remember who stood for us when the courts came calling. The tide turned in minutes. Caught between the church's defenders and Apache justice, the raiders scattered. Some fled into the desert where the Apache tracked them with terrible efficiency. Others surrendered, preferring federal custody to tribal vengeance. Ashford himself tried to run, making it as far as the burning courthouse before Lillian's shot took him in the knee. He fell screaming in the street, where Thomas Hannigan had died. Poetic justice written in blood and dust. As the sun rose over Dustwater, the cost became clear. A third of the town lay in ruins, 17 dead, including 2 deputies and 5 townspeople, but they'd held. They'd survived. So much for 6 months, Lillian said, standing in the ashes of the courthouse. This town needs years of rebuilding now. Towns can rebuild themselves. Colt said, We've done our part. Have we? She looked around at the faces, Apache and Mexican, farmer and merchant, all united by shared loss and common purpose. Or have we just started something bigger than we imagined? Marshal Tucker approached, hat in hand. Miss Granger, I've had word from the governor. In light of recent events, he's offering you an appointment, federal magistrate for the district, full authority to establish law and order as you see fit. I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than any 3 lawyers I know. You understand justice and mercy both. Tucker smiled. Besides, the Apache trust you. The Mexicans trust you. Hell, even the ranchers trust you now. That's worth more than any law degree. Lillian looked at Colt, saw the understanding in his eyes. California would wait. The ocean would still be there when duty was done. I'll want deputies I can trust, she said, and funds for rebuilding, and guarantees that tribal land rights will be respected. Done, done, and done. Welcome to federal service. Judge Granger. Not Granger, she said firmly. That name died with my father. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it as my mother's daughter, Judge Lillian Morales. Tucker's smile widened. Even better. Judge Morales it is. As the marshal walked away to organize the cleanup, Colt pulled Lillian close. You sure about this? It's not the freedom we planned. No, she admitted. But maybe freedom isn't about running away. Maybe it's about choosing to stand where you're needed, even when standing is hard. Your mother would be proud. I hope so. She looked up at him. Will you stay? Help me build something worthwhile from these ashes. Try to make me leave. He kissed her as the sun climbed higher, bathing the broken town in light that promised new beginnings. Besides, someone needs to keep you from becoming your father. Never, she said fiercely. I know what justice costs now. Know it in my bones. Around them, Dustwater began the slow work of resurrection. Children picked through rubble for treasures. Women organized care for the wounded. Men cleared debris and salvaged what could be saved. Apache warriors stood guard alongside federal deputies, an alliance born of necessity but growing into something deeper. It wasn't the ending either of them had imagined when Colt rode back into town seeking vengeance. But perhaps it was the ending Dustwater needed, not just the death of the old, but the painful birth of something new. Written in sacrifice and sealed in hope. The ocean would wait. California would keep. For now, there was work to do, justice to build, and a future to forge from the bitter lessons of the past. Judge Lillian Morales stood in the ruins of her father's empire and began again. The federal prosecutor arrived on the noon stage, dust-covered and skeptical. William Thornton had traveled from Santa Fe to oversee what promised to be the territory's most significant corruption trial. And his first impression of Dustwater's new judge was not favorable. You're younger than I expected, he said, surveying Lillian across the makeshift courtroom they'd established in the old mercantile building. And you're more prejudiced than your reputation suggested, she replied coolly. Shall we proceed with business? Or would you prefer to catalog more of my deficiencies? Thornton's mouth twitched. Fair enough. Show me what you have. For 3 hours, they reviewed evidence, financial records salvaged from the fire, witness testimonies, Tom Weathers' confession. The deeper they went, the quieter Thornton became. This is comprehensive, he finally admitted. Your father kept damning records. He was arrogant, believed his power put him above consequences. Lillian closed the latest ledger. He was wrong. Indeed, we have enough here to posthumously convict him 20 times over. The question is how to handle the living conspirators. Publicly, Colt said from the doorway. He'd been overseeing security for the upcoming trials. This town needs to see justice done openly, not in back rooms. Mr. Hannigan. Thornton's tone was neutral. I understand you have a personal stake in these proceedings. Every person in Dustwater has a personal stake. That's what happens when corruption runs this deep. Colt moved to stand beside Lillian. Question is whether federal authority will honor that stake or sweep it under bureaucratic carpet. I don't sweep, Thornton said. But I also don't conduct witch hunts. We'll need to be surgical. Prosecute the truly guilty without destroying the innocent. Then we're in agreement, Lillian said. I've prepared a list of defendants, categorized by level of involvement. Some were willing participants, others were coerced. The distinction matters. The trials began the following week. Word had spread throughout the territory, drawing journalists, curiosity seekers, and families of victims from across New Mexico. The mercantile's main floor became a courtroom, with boards laid over the display counters for seating. Lillian presided with careful dignity, aware that every ruling would be scrutinized. She wore her mother's cameo at her throat, the only jewelry that had survived the fire, and let it remind her of the woman who'd endured injustice in silence. The first defendant was Marcus Holbrook, owner of the Dustwater Bank. He'd laundered money for Ryman, foreclosed on families who couldn't pay manufactured debts. The evidence was clear, his guilt undeniable. "How do you plead?" Lillian asked. Holbrook, once proud and prosperous, seemed to have aged a decade in weeks. "Guilty, Your Honor. I was afraid. They threatened my family if I didn't cooperate. Fear explains your actions. It doesn't excuse them." Lillian's voice carried no sympathy. "You had choices. You chose comfortable complicity over dangerous integrity." The sentence was 10 years hard labor, restitution to victims, forfeiture of assets gained through corruption. Holbrook wept as they led him away, but the crowd remained silent. Justice, they were learning, didn't always feel like victory. The trials continued for days. Some defendants, like Holbrook, admitted guilt and threw themselves on the court's mercy. Others fought with expensive lawyers imported from eastern cities, challenging jurisdiction, questioning evidence, attempting to paint Lillian as a vengeful daughter persecuting her father's associates. "Isn't it true," one lawyer proclaimed, "that you shot your own father in cold blood?" "I shot a man who was fleeing federal arrest," Lillian replied evenly. "That he was my father by law is immaterial to the question of his guilt. But surely your personal feelings, my personal feelings are not on trial. The defendant's actions are, unless you have relevant questions, counselor." Through it all, Colt watched from the back of the room, hand never far from his weapon. Threats had been made, anonymous letters promising retribution, strangers asking too many questions about the judge's routines. He'd recruited Apache warriors and reformed outlaws as additional security, creating an unlikely but effective force. On the fourth day, Tom Weathers took the stand, 60 days sober now. He looked like a different man, thin but clear-eyed, haunted but determined. "State your name for the record," Thornton instructed. "Thomas James Weathers, former deputy sheriff of Dustwater." "Mr. Weathers, tell the court about the night of October 15th, 1868. Weathers' testimony was devastating. He named names, provided details, explained the machinery of corruption that had ground so many beneath its wheels. When he described planting evidence to frame Thomas Hannigan, his voice broke. "I see that boy's face every night," he said, looking directly at Colt. 12 years old, screaming for his PA. "I helped murder an innocent man and orphan a child. No amount of whiskey ever washed that clean." The defense attorneys tried to discredit him. Drunk, unreliable, motivated by revenge. But his specificity, his documentation, his obvious pain made him unshakable. "Thank you, Mr. Weathers," Lillian said when he finished. "The court recognizes the courage required for your testimony. Don't thank me, Judge. Just make it matter. Make all this pain count for something." That evening, exhausted from the day's proceedings, Lillian found Colt on the porch of their temporary quarters, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. "Weathers did good today," she said, settling beside him. He did what he should have done 10 years ago. Colt's movements were precise, automatic. But yeah, he did good. You can't forgive him. Forgiveness isn't mine to give. That belongs to my PA, and he's past caring. He set the rifle aside. But I can acknowledge he's trying to balance the scales. That's something. Is that what we're doing? Balancing scales? Maybe, or maybe we're just building new ones. He pulled her close. Either way, it's better than what was. A commotion in the street drew their attention. Riders approached, a dozen men in federal badges, led by a figure Lillian recognized with sinking heart. "Judge Advocate Harrison," she murmured. "From Washington. Trouble?" "Potentially. He has the power to overturn everything we've done if he finds it irregular." Harrison dismounted with military precision. He was everything Lillian wasn't. Male, Eastern educated, backed by decades of precedent and political connection. "Judge Morales," he said, touching his hat brim. "I've come to observe your proceedings, ensure federal standards are being maintained." "Of course. You're welcome in my courtroom. Judge Harrison?" His smile was thin. "Your courtroom. Yes, we'll need to discuss that." The next morning, Harrison sat to Lillian's right, watching everything with hawk eyes. His presence changed the room's dynamic. Defendants grew bolder, attorneys more aggressive, the crowd restless. "Your Honor," one defense lawyer said, "I move for dismissal of all charges. This court lacks proper authority." Motion denied. Lillian ruled. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I have federal appointment and you have no basis for challenge beyond the fact that I'm a woman." "Your Honor, would you make this same challenge if I were Samuel Granger's son rather than his daughter?" The lawyer faltered. Harrison leaned forward slightly. "Interested." "Furthermore," Lillian continued, "the federal statute regarding judicial appointments makes no gender distinction. Your motion is not only denied, but noted as frivolous. Another such waste of the court's time will result in contempt charges." At the noon recess, Harrison approached her. "Interesting morning. Typical morning. These lawyers test boundaries daily. And you hold firm." He studied her. "I expected something different. A hysterical woman playing at justice? Perhaps. Washington has concerns about appointing someone so personally involved in these cases. Would Washington prefer I recuse myself and let these crimes go unpunished? Because no other judge will take this assignment. They're either bought, intimidated, or uninterested in frontier problems." "You sound like your mother." Lillian froze. "You knew her?" "Elena Morales. We met once, years ago, when I was a young attorney traveling the circuit. She was—" he paused, choosing words. "Memorable. Spoke truth regardless of consequence. That truth trapped her in marriage to my father. No, circumstances trapped her. Truth gave her dignity within that trap." Harrison's stern facade cracked slightly. "I was sorry to hear of her death. Sorrier still to learn how she'd lived." The afternoon session brought the most challenging case yet. Maria Santos, whose husband had died in Ryman's mine under suspicious circumstances. In grief and rage, she'd burned down Ryman's office, destroying records that might have proved other crimes. "She's guilty of arson," Thornton argued. "The law is clear. The law failed her first." Her defender countered. "Where was justice when her husband was worked to death? When his wages were stolen? When her children starved?" Lillian felt Harrison watching, weighing her response to this test. Easy to follow the letter of law, harder to serve its spirit. Mrs. "Santos," she said, "do you understand the charges against you?" The woman stood straight despite her shackles. "I understand plenty. Senora Judge, I understand my Pablo is dead. I understand his killers got rich from his blood. I understand fire was the only justice available. The court recognizes your loss, but vigilante action cannot be condoned, regardless of provocation." Lillian paused, weighing words and consequences. "However, the court also recognizes extenuating circumstances. Maria Santos, you are found guilty of destruction of property, sentenced to time served plus 1 year's probation, during which you will work with the court to document mining abuses for federal investigation." "Your Honor," Thornton protested, "the sentencing guidelines allow for judicial discretion in cases of extreme circumstance, unless the prosecution wishes to argue that systematic murder and theft don't constitute extreme circumstance." Thornton subsided. In the gallery, families who had lost minors nodded approval. Harrison made a note. The day's final case was postponed when gunfire erupted outside. Colt was moving before the echoes faded, rifle in hand. Through the window, Lillian saw riders fleeing. One slumped over his saddle. "Another assassination attempt," Colt reported minutes later. "Apache scouts intercepted them." "How many more?" Lillian asked wearily. "Until there's no profit in it, until the cost gets too high." He touched her shoulder. "You're doing good work. That makes you dangerous to those who profited from bad. That night, Harrison invited himself to dinner. They ate simple fare, beans, cornbread, coffee, while discussing law and justice and the gap between them. "You're not what I expected," Harrison admitted. "When I heard Samuel Granger's daughter had killed him and taken his place, I imagined differently." "You imagined a woman driven by emotion rather than principle?" "I imagined someone using law for personal vengeance. Instead, I find someone trying to build something better from ruins." He set down his coffee cup. "It won't be easy. You have enemies, limited resources, centuries of precedent against you. I have truth, and a town full of people hungry for justice." Lillian met his eyes. "That might be enough." "It might," Harrison agreed. "Tell me, what will you do when the trials end? When the immediate crisis passes?" She looked at Colt, who'd been silent through dinner. They'd talked about California, about escape, about freedom, but increasingly, those dreams felt like another kind of running. "I'll serve as long as I'm needed," she said. "This town, this territory, deserves consistent justice, not another carpetbagger who'll leave when better opportunities arise." "And Mr. Hannigan?" Colt spoke for the first time. "I go where she goes. Someone needs to keep the judge breathing while she reforms the world." Harrison smiled. A real expression this time, not his practiced courthouse mask. "Then I'll recommend to Washington that your appointment be made permanent, with expanded jurisdiction and resources." "Why?" Lillian asked. "Because you're right. This territory needs judges who understand both law and humanity, who've seen injustice firsthand and choose to build rather than burn." He stood. "Continue as you've begun. Judge Morales, make your mother proud." After he left, Lillian and Colt sat in companionable silence, watching stars emerge in the desert sky. "Permanent appointment," Colt mused. "Not quite the same as California beaches." "No," she agreed. "But maybe better. Maybe this is our ocean, vast and dangerous and necessary." "Poetic. You been reading Whitman again?" She laughed. "Among other things, building a legal system requires inspiration from somewhere. And us." He took her hand. "What's justice look like for two people who found each other in the middle of all this chaos?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to find out. Here, building something that matters. Together." He kissed her under those ancient stars, sealing a promise that needed no words. Tomorrow would bring more trials, more threats, more careful construction of justice from injustice's ashes. But tonight, they had each other in the knowledge that they'd chosen to stand rather than run. In the distance, Dustwater's lights flickered. A town reborn, imperfect but trying, just like its judge, just like its deputy, just like the love they'd built from vengeance and pain and the stubborn belief that people could be better than their worst moments. The ocean would always be there if they needed it, but for now, they had found their shore in the desert, where justice bloomed like flowers after rain, rare, precious, and worth every sacrifice to sustain. The spring sun warmed Dustwater's streets as Lillian sat propped against pillows in the small medical clinic, reading through legal documents while Colt dozed in the chair beside her bed. His shoulder was bound tight where the second bullet had torn through, but Doc Morrison assured them both wounds would heal clean. "You need to rest," Sarah Walsh said, entering with fresh bandages. The school teacher had volunteered as nurse when her classes weren't in session. "Those papers will keep. The territorial legislature convenes next month," Lillian replied, though she set the documents aside. "If we want lasting reform, we need proper laws, not just judicial precedent." "You nearly died," Sarah reminded her. "Perhaps delegate for once?" Colt stirred at that, his good hand finding Lillian's. "She doesn't know how to delegate. Thinks the whole world will collapse if she takes a day off," says the man who insisted on riding patrol with a bullet in his shoulder. Lillian countered. They bickered gently while Sarah changed bandages, the kind of comfortable disagreement that spoke of deep understanding. Through the window, they could hear construction, new buildings rising where old ones had burned, the sound of Dustwater rebuilding stronger than before. Tom Weathers appeared in the doorway. Wearing the deputy's badge Colt had finally pinned on him after 90 days sober. "Judge, Mr. Hannigan. Got a visitor asking for you. Says it's important." The visitor was a young woman, Mexican features mixed with something else. Wearing traveling clothes covered in trail dust, she clutched a worn leather portfolio like her life depended on it. "Judge Morales?" Her voice carried a slight accent. "I'm Isabella McKay. I've ridden from Amarillo to find you." The name struck Lillian like lightning. "McKay, you're James McKay's daughter. Your half-sister, I suppose, though we share no blood." Isabella's chin lifted. "My father was your mother's first husband." Colt straightened, suddenly alert despite his wounds. Lillian felt the world tilt slightly. "I didn't know James had children," she managed. "Just me, born 3 months after he died, raised by his sister in Texas." Isabella stepped closer. "I've spent years trying to understand what happened to my mother after father died. The trail led here, to you." "Sit," Lillian said. "Please, tell me what you know." Isabella's story unfolded like a map of old pain. How Elena Morales had loved James McKay with fierce devotion. How his death from fever had nearly killed her too. How her family, desperate and starving, had sold her to Samuel Granger like livestock. She wrote letters, Isabella said, opening the portfolio. "To my aunt, telling her about the pregnancy, about the marriage to your father, about—" She paused. "About you." Lillian took the letters with trembling hands. Her mother's writing, younger and full of grief. "The judge knows I carry James's child. He says he will raise it as his own if I comply. If I resist, he will cast me out, and my family will starve. What choice do I have? I pray James forgives me from heaven." "The baby," Lillian whispered. "Father said it died." "He lied." Isabella's voice was flat. "I lived, but he couldn't bear raising his rival's child. So he sent me away. Told my mother I was dead. Told my aunt to never contact her again." The letters painted a picture of systematic cruelty. Samuel Granger breaking Elena's spirit piece by piece, using the fiction of her dead child as a weapon, forcing her to bear him a daughter to replace the one he'd stolen. "She never knew," Lillian said. "All those years, grieving for you, and you were alive in Texas. While I grew up believing my mother abandoned me for a rich man's comfort." Isabella's composure finally cracked. "I hated her for so long. Only when my aunt was dying did she tell me the truth." Colt poured water for both women, his movements careful around his injury. The clinic felt too small for such enormous revelations. "Why come now?" he asked gently. "Your mother's gone. The judge is dead. What's left?" "Family," Isabella said simply. "You're all I have left of her. And—" She hesitated. "There are others. Other women Samuel Granger destroyed, other children hidden away. I've been finding them, gathering their stories." She pulled out more documents. Birth certificates, adoption papers, testimonies. A network of pain spreading from one man's cruelty. He specialized in vulnerable women, Isabella explained. Mexicans, Indians, anyone without protection, used them, discarded them, stole their children if it suited him. You weren't his only victim, just the only one he kept. Lillian felt sick. The father she'd feared and hated was worse than her darkest imaginings. "How many?" "At least 12 that I've found. Probably more." Isabella met her eyes. "I want justice for them. Heard you were building something new here, something honest. Will you help?" "Yes." The word came without thought, from the same place that had put a bullet in Samuel Granger. "We'll find them all. Document everything. Make it public." "Lillian," Colt warned. "You're supposed to be healing. This is healing. For all of us." She gripped Isabella's hand. "Stay, please. I want to know everything about your life, about the parts of our mother I never saw." Isabella's smile transformed her face. "I'd like that. I brought—" She reached into her bag, pulled out a small painted portrait. "My aunt saved this. said it was done just after the wedding. The painting showed Elena Morales McKay at 17, radiant with love, before tragedy touched her. Lillian traced the familiar features, seeing for the first time the woman her mother had been before Samuel Granger's shadow fell. She was happy, she said wonderingly. She was loved, Isabella corrected. My father worshipped her, called her his desert rose, said she made the harsh land bloom. They talked through the afternoon, sharing memories and stories, building a bridge across years of lies. Colt eventually dozed again, worn by injury and emotion, but the women continued their careful construction of family from fragments. As evening approached, Tom Weathers knocked. Judge, sorry to interrupt, but there's news from Santa Fe. The legislature voted on your proposals. Lillian had submitted extensive reforms, women's property rights, protection for minority land claims, accountability measures for judicial misconduct. She'd expected fierce resistance. And passed. All of it. Seems Judge Harrison made quite a speech about the future of territorial justice. Weathers grinned. You've got enemies spitting nails, but the governor signed everything into law. Isabella squeezed Lillian's hand. Our mother would be so proud. Our mother deserved to see it herself, Lillian replied. But there was joy beneath the sorrow. Elena's daughters reunited, her sacrifice finally bearing fruit. Over the following days, as Lillian and Colt healed, Isabella became part of their strange family. She had her father's Irish humor mixed with her mother's steel, and a talent for investigation that proved invaluable. Together, they tracked down Samuel Granger's other victims, building cases for restitution and reunion. One morning, Lillian found Colt standing at the window, watching Isabella teach Mexican children their letters in the dusty street. She's staying, isn't she? He said. If she wants. Dustwater needs teachers as much as it needs lawmen. She leaned against his good shoulder. Is that all right? Family's family, however it comes together. He kissed her temple. Besides, someone needs to keep you humble. Can't have the judge thinking she hung the moon. I thought that was your job. I'm biased. Think you hung the stars too? She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in memory. The wounds were healing, not just the physical ones, but the deeper cuts Samuel Granger had left on everyone he'd touched. It would take time, maybe forever, but healing was possible. A week later, Lillian presided over her first wedding as judge. Tom Weathers, 97 days sober, married Sarah Walsh in the rebuilt church while half the town watched. Father Miguel performed the religious ceremony, but Lillian handled the civil portion, speaking words about second chances and redemption that had the groom crying openly. You may kiss your bride, she pronounced, and the church erupted in celebration. At the reception, held in the street because no building could hold everyone who came, Lillian danced with Colt under stars and paper lanterns. His shoulder was still tender, but he held her like she was precious and unbreakable both. Happy? He asked. Getting there. She looked around at the transformed town, Apache and Mexican and Anglo celebrating together, former enemies sharing drinks, children playing without fear. It's not perfect, may never be, but it's better. Better's enough to start with. He spun her carefully. Been thinking about something Harrison said, about making things permanent. The appointment. That's already. Not the appointment. He stopped dancing, pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold ring. Nothing fancy, but solid and real. This kind of permanent. Lillian's breath caught. Around them, dancers continued, but the world had narrowed to just them. Colt Hannigan. Is this a proposal? It's a question. Whether a federal judge wants to marry a worn-out gunfighter who's trying to turn lawman. Whether we can build something lasting from all this broken ground. You're not worn out. You're seasoned. She touched his face. And I'm not just a judge. I'm Elena's daughter, Isabella's sister, and the woman who loves you. Yes, Colt. Yes to all of it. He kissed her there in the street, surrounded by their cobbled-together community. And the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Santa Fe, later as the party wound down. Isabella found them sitting on the church steps. "I've decided to stay," she announced. "If you'll have me, this town needs schools. Proper ones. And I need—" She gestured at the celebrating crowd. "This family, purpose, home. Then stay." Lillian said simply, "Help us build something Mother would recognize as justice." They sat together as Dustwater celebrated around them, the judge who'd killed her father to save her soul, the gunfighter who'd chosen law over vengeance, and the teacher who'd traveled hundreds of miles to find her stolen family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new chances to fail or succeed. But tonight, under desert stars that had witnessed so much pain and promise, they were simply three people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build rather than burn. Elena Morales' legacy lived on, not in the cold halls of the house on the hill, but in the warm breath of justice finally taking root in barren ground. As Colt had said, it wasn't perfect, but it was better and better. Cultivated with patience and courage and love, might someday bloom into something beautiful enough to wash even the deepest stains clean. The transformation of Dustwater continued. One trial, one law, one act of courage at a time. And at its heart stood Lillian Morales, no longer the ghost in her father's house, but a woman fully alive, dispensing justice with her mother's compassion and her own hard-won wisdom. The ocean still called sometimes in dreams. But when she woke, it was to desert sunrise and the solid warmth of Colt beside her, and the knowledge that some shores you have to build yourself, one grain of sand at a time. In the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to our story from the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you driving through the countryside, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long journey? Please subscribe to our channel From Wild West and share your thoughts about Lillian and Colt's journey in the comments below. Your feedback helps us craft more authentic stories of love, justice, and redemption in the American frontier. Don't forget to share this with fellow Western enthusiasts.